Hello, today I'm gonna show you some ruins from Sardinia, which leave the impression as if they belong to the early industrial era, but still the entire setup around them is extremely strange and only leads to questions without answers. The first spot with such ruins was at the location of this group of Domus de Janus, one of the biggest and most impressive in entire Sardinia. So we were walking in this area with many groups of Domus de Janus. And initially we simply thought that this is just a spot with some sort of modern quarry. But then we noticed that the well-leveled and big surface in front of the quarried wall was rather strange. As if after using the spot for quarrying, somebody took the time to perfectly level this big square in front of it, and then maybe had time to play with the big machine with these circles, the circle saw with which they cut the stone and make these designs on the floor, on the ground.
In most of the sites, even
It is a hard rock, huh?
yeah.
And does it continue underground? Yeah. Yeah, it does continue. Maybe. Okay. So if this quarrying took place in the early days of industrialization, maybe then the stone would have enough time to erode to this extent, and also the site would have had enough time to get partially buried with soil as it is now. But then the question is, in the early industrial days, it was actually the only time when these sites were protected and cleaned, only once excavated and cleaned in Italy. Now they're totally abandoned and overgrown, and there will be no surprise if somebody starts quarrying, but in those days they were respected. And the other thing is, would it really make financial sense to quarry on such a small scale in a remote location? After all, you have to bring electrical equipment for that, either very long cables or some electricity generator. But why to bring all that in the wild? It's much cheaper to purchase stone. And on the other hand, some of the designs didn't have that much modern look to them. It looked as if the quarrying took place after the designs were made much earlier. And we were joking, it kind of looked like as if somebody came and made an entire Domus de Janus to pieces and took it away. And while at the first sight with such ruins, that was just a joke, when we found a second very similar spot, we are not sure if it is a joke or an actual possibility, because the place where we found the second wall, which looked very, very similar, was exactly in the middle of a row of Domus de Janus. They were just one after another here on the left-hand side, and at the spot where stone was quarried or taken away, there would have been simply more Domus de Janus. This is the second location. Here the wall that was cut was much higher, and again leveled surface in front of it, overgrown. But this location was even more wild and hard to access. Although there was a road a couple of hundred meters away, still you need to bring some sort of big power generator, because again it looked like quite a big disc has been used to make all these deep and wide cuttings. I can't even imagine that discs would be mounted on portable equipment for cutting stone, discs of this size, but anyhow, I'm not a specialist. And even if somebody would decide to make such an expensive endeavor and quarry locally for some reason, why not quarry at an easier spot? This entire hill is just a stone. The stone is same everywhere. They could have quarried nearer to the road, where it would be also much easier to transport the stone afterwards. And what was really strange on this second site is that there were these typical markings on the stone ground, which I've been showing all around the rock-cut ruins and the ancient tracks, as if something was dragged around while the surface was still soft. So there were lots of such markings on this site. They are a little bit too faint, so you won't see them very well on the footage. And they appeared, at least maybe a little bit, to point towards this spot. Here on the right hand side is the area in front of the wall, and on the left hand side begins the steep slope downhill. So these cuttings, which appeared mostly modern and industrial, were kind of intertwined with these older markings, and at places they seemed to merge. Also, the extent of the erosion was considerable. Of course, as discussed in previous videos, that doesn't necessarily mean that the site is old and pre-industrial, because the modern estimates for the rate of erosion are absolute joke, and so are the rates at which lichen grows. In reality, they are much faster than they are assuring us. But still, even with a much faster rate of erosion, the erosion was too much. So I have a second expedition to Sardinia planned, starting the last week of November this year, because during the first expedition we saw only half of the ruins, which are very near to the roads. Otherwise, if one has time to go inside, really in the wilderness, there are much more ruins. So during the second expedition, if our turbulent current times allow it to take place, we will see the other half of easily accessible ruins, and let's see, will there be more weird sites of this type, or maybe we will find the answer of the riddle? And since this is the last video from the first Sardinia expedition, here at the end I will include some footage from this huge dolmen called Sa Mores and the beautiful well of Santa Cristina.